Hello, welcome to the History Video Revision podcast for foreign policy in the 1950s, 1951 to 64. First up, decolonisation. Britain had started to accept imperial decline after World War I. Despite decolonisation of India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka and Burma, and withdrawal from Palestine, Turkey and Greece in the 1940s, political and public opinion was slow to recognise the decline of empire. Churchill in 1951-55 was less willing to decolonise. The sterling area had been set up in World War II and continued afterwards to discriminate against trade with hard currencies like the US dollar. It became a way for Britain to earn dollars by buying dollars from the colonies and giving them a sterling credit to spend anywhere in the sterling area. Other attempts to make empire pay, such as getting cheap food from the empire and attracting American investment, never really worked, and in fact contributed to the pressure for decolonialisation. By 1950, Britain was beginning to trade less with the Empire, or Commonwealth, and more with other industrialised nations. Plus, several violent nationalist uprisings against British colonial rule after World War II, including the Mau Mau Rebellion, which damaged British reputation, and rebellions in Malaya, the communist rebellion there, and in Cyprus, showed the scope of our problems. But we weren't the only country facing these problems. Portugal, France, Belgium also had these problems. In the 1950s, Britain believed it could gradually move from empire to Commonwealth until those countries were ready for independence. And we believed that resistant movements could be controlled until the people were ready for independence. And until Suez, it worked to an extent. The relationship with America. Our aim was to keep them involved in European affairs. We were already involved with them in this period, as we were fighting with them in the Cold War in Korea. Britain had become a founder member of NATO in 1949, also with the USA. We had close-ish cooperation on intelligence and nuclear deterrence. However, there were a lot of pressures on the relationship. The Burgess and Maclean scandal, where two British spies defected to the USSR and were leaking UK secrets to the Soviets, highly disturbed the Americans. The Suez Crisis was a huge pressure on us and the relationship. Britain also resented the USA pushing us into the EEC. Overall, though, we remained close allies in the Cold War, and there were good relationships between Macmillan and Kennedy after 1961. We were very dependent on America militarily in this time. For example, our Blue Streak rocket project was abandoned by 1960, and we were buying Polaris submarine weapon systems from them. The Suez Crisis is a main event in foreign policy in this period. The Suez Canal was one of the keystones of Britain's overseas empire and trade routes. We had been the ruling power in Egypt since 1880, and the canal had become the main artery connecting the Mediterranean to the Indian and Pacific Oceans, where a lot of our colonies and dominions were. The canal was also the main route for Western oil shipments, up to 80% of imports coming through this channel. And crucially, it could be paid for in pounds, and therefore we wouldn't have to waste precious dollars. After World War I, the British had helped set up the Egyptian monarchy, but we were still very influential in the country, and Nasser led a revolt against the British involvement and influence in the country, and wanted to establish full independence, preferably with the support of the USA and GB, and at first he was on good terms with us and the USA. Pressured by the United States in 1954, Britain had withdrawn troops from the Canal Zone by 1956, and both the USA and Britain were promising loans for the Aswan Dam project. However, when America found out that Nasser was also considering Soviet loans, they withdrew their funding, and Nasser in return nationalised the Suez Canal to raise money instead. Now, Britain couldn't simply accept the nationalisation of such an important canal, and agreed with the USA to destabilise Nasser's regime through economic and political pressure, but economic and political pressure only. Anthony Eden, who'd just become Prime Minister, was very aware of the idea of appeasement against an evil dictator, and believed that Nasser would be a danger to African stability and wanted more direct action than this. There was a UN resolution to condemn Nasser, but it was vetoed by the Soviet Union. France, due to Nasser's help for Arab nationalists in Algeria, and Israel, who were naturally anti-Arab, were in agreement with us, and there was a secret deal at Sèvres in Paris to get Israel to attack Egypt, and then France and Great Britain would intervene. In the meanwhile, they would seize the Suez Canal and the zone around it back. Now, the Joint Intelligence Committee had warned Eden that the USA would be fairly negative to this plan, but there was also the feeling that some of them, including Dulles, would have accepted the plan if it was done quickly, and Eden was led to believe that he would get at least moral support from America. However, once the plan was put into operation, America was incensed about the deception and being ignored, and they helped plunge Britain into a financial crisis. There was an international run on the pound, but where the USA could have bailed us out, they refused to until we'd pulled out. They were worried about the Cold War atmosphere because Russia had just invaded Hungary, and the West found it quite difficult to take the moral high ground after we'd invaded Suez. The Commonwealth countries did not back us, and India even backed Egypt. Eventually there was a UN resolution to end our intervention and cause a ceasefire, but that was vetoed by ourselves. Macmillan, who'd been a strong supporter of the plan in the first place, was the first to realise we had to pull out, and the Soviets even threatened rockets against us all and our forces in there, and they were probably bluffing, but even so. We eventually pulled out, and Eden's career was ruined. He had lied to Parliament about it, and he was also very ill at the time, which all of the above forced him to resign in 1957. It ended the Suez Crisis, ended a lot of the illusions about our imperial grandeur, and it reinforced our reliance on the USA. Meanwhile, Israel was bitter with us for leaving a job half done, and eventually it caused a reduction in troops from 700,000 men to 375,000 men after 1957. However, Suez did not bring about a major foreign policy review. This is the end of part 1 of this revision podcast. Try and find part 2 somewhere on YouTube.